and I use they, them pronouns. I am coming to you today from the town of Ramapo, New York, which is on unceded Ramapo Lenape land. And I'm really excited to be presenting this to you today. Just a little bit about myself. I been most recently a senior manager of UX and digital design. I've been on a board for DE&I to advise people on how best practices and how we should be very inclusive of accessibility. I'm adopted by two cats, which I'm sure a lot of people here can relate to. And I'm studying a Master's of Disability Studies at the City University of New York. And I also identify as a disability advocate because I have disabilities. So I have several disabilities that I've had since childhood. And I also have some later in life acquired disabilities. So I wanted to go over some of the terms that we're exploring today, just so that we can all be familiar and kind of on the same page. And you may have already heard of these. The first one is intersectionality and identity. So when we talk about identity, we're talking about some of the lived experiences that people have, such as like me being a person with a disability, or me being a person that is queer. So when we talk about these identities and like how they intersect with each other and affect each other, that's when we talk about intersectionality. And so somebody's experience who is Black and a woman and disabled might be different from someone who's white and non-binary and disabled. So we have to acknowledge that those experiences are different and that our culture and our experiences can play into the different experiences that we have as people. And I just wanted to apologize. I do have a visual disability and I didn't provide a description of myself because I'm a little bit nervous. I am a white non-binary person. I have blue and rainbow hair, and I'm wearing a very bright green and black and white sweater today. I have very fair skin. I also love to wear these hexagon glasses. They're part of how I view myself as a person. They're one of my signature items. So back to the terms that we're covering today. Diversity and inclusion has been a really hot topic lately. One of the things that we mean when we say diversity and inclusion is really talking about like breaking down systems that have been excluding people based on their identities. And then neurodiversity is the next term I would like to cover. And I am a neurodiverse person. It's just about different ways of thinking and being, such as having some mental illnesses or a cognitive disability, or for some people, autism or ADHD. I personally am someone that has ADHD and I'm also autistic. So that influences the way that I communicate with others and also just sometimes my abilities, both physically and mentally. Another term I'd like to explore is ableism and disableism. Uh, they're used interchangeably, but a lot of people are trying to use disableism instead of ableism because it centers the disability experience a little bit more. And what we mean by that is a preference for non-disabled people. So it's a bias against disabled people. And then when we start talking about these biases and when we start talking about preferences that people have in society, the implicit and unconscious bias versus an explicit bias is another term I wanted to cover before we dive in. And that is an implicit or unconscious bias is something that you may not be aware of. So that can be something that you've just grown up with societally, like that it's okay to make jokes about people, or that you just have this idea that maybe someone can't do as much, or maybe that you have just a very slight preference for somebody that is non-disabled, and you may not even be completely aware of it. But when we talk about explicit bias, that's a stated bias against people. So that would be if someone said, I don't want to hire someone that's disabled. And of course, that's a little bit easier to spot. And it's very hurtful usually, but the way that those show up is in the next term, which is microaggressions. So often people don't realize when they have an implicit or unconscious bias that it comes out in microaggressions, like saying things to people that hurt their feelings or, aren't maybe always an issue that you want to confront, like in the workplace, but it might be something that builds up over time and becomes something that is very heavy and very difficult to deal with because people are having to field it so often. And there's a lot of really great literature out there about microaggressions. And at the end of the slideshow, I'll have a list of links that have my resources that I use to build this presentation and also some resources for further learning. And microaggressions is one of those because I think it's something that we could all really examine and see where we might be letting unconscious bias get into how we treat other people and to try to mitigate that. So we're going to talk first about bias. My title has two core things that I want to address, which is the bias and the burnout that people in the accessibility community are facing. And I especially want to center disabled people in this conversation because disabled people are really key to creating accessible experiences. So this story is about people and it is about anecdotes, but it's also about data. So we do have some data. And I'm in this story. Once we start putting all of these stories together, it does become data because I have not met a disabled person that doesn't have a story about being very explicitly biased. Well, I'm sorry. I want to rephrase that. That hasn't experienced explicit bias. For instance, I was interviewing for a job once and I was talking about accessibility and how passionate I am about it. And the person said, well, how did you come to become so passionate about this? Like, what led you to become an expert in accessibility? And I said, well, I experienced firsthand how alienating and how difficult it is to face accessibility barriers, and that really changed how I operated and how I felt about accessibility. It wasn't something I was as aware of before, but now it's something I'm very passionate about changing. And they said, if I were as disabled as you, I wouldn't want to live anymore. And I was so surprised, honestly. Like, I definitely knew that there were people out there like that, but it was something that I kept hearing over and over again throughout the years, is that people would be like, "Oh, I can never do that," and that's something that's very hard. And in fact, there's people that are writing books about this right now. There's people that are sharing their experiences online and telling their stories, and I start to see this pattern emerging of there's just not many people that I know that don't have this explicit bias experience. And bias of many kinds is a reality in several areas. I would say that we don't have data that overlaps between tech disability professions uh, explicitly, but we do have data from both accessibility and disability professions. And accessibility is such a niche area that I really feel like should be welcoming to people with disabilities. And disability studies really gives us some insight into this because if you think about it, the ADA was only signed into law in 1990. So we don't have a very long history, even in the US or any other country, of having protections for people with disabilities, both in the workplace and in making sure that companies and organizations are accommodating of disabilities. Sorry. And disclosure is really difficult for disabled workers and can be dangerous. People with less apparent disabilities like low vision, cognitive disabilities, chronic health conditions, or that need accommodations for neurodivergence often face stigma in the workplace when they're requesting accommodations, such as colleagues may assume that they are falsely claiming their disabilities for special treatment. They may be told that they aren't able to give those accommodations, even though they're very reasonable, like writing things down or making sure that directions are very clear. Another thing that I've noticed is that sometimes people are told that they are seen as less capable after disclosing their disabilities. And so they do not disclose their disabilities for fear that they will be viewed as less capable. And when we talk about disability, it's hard not to talk about the wage gap and disability. And again, well, I brought up intersectionality at the beginning because it's hard to not look at this intersectionally as well and to consider the impact that it has on people that are multiply marginalized. When we look at the different pay rates, there's a WebAIM study, and the third one just came out in, I believe it was 2021. But I do have those references available on that resource slide. But over time, the pay gap has gotten less, but we're looking at, by gender, male respondents earning about $75,000 on average, non-binary or gender queer respondents earning about 71 and a half $1,000, or sorry, 71,500. It's very difficult to sign this. I'm very sorry to Lizzie. And then female respondents are earning even less at 69,600. And when we look at those numbers broken out a little bit easier to understand, we see that compared to men, women earn an average of $6,100 less. And when we compare men to non-binary, genderqueer, or gender non-conforming respondents, they earn $3,800 less. And that's including people that you might perceive as men or women. So sometimes that average kind of brings the average down a bit because you don't know how people are being perceived. And so you might have people that are perceived as men that are earning more and people that are perceived as women that are earning less, and it averages out. One of the questions that they put on this study from WebAIM was, do you consider yourself to have a disability? And 29.1% said, yes, I consider myself to have a disability. And 70.9% said no. That is a much higher rate of people that are disabled per population that have disclosed it than most people do in a workplace. And then when we look at the over time, I see a trend, which is disabled workers still earn less. There is still a disabled worker wage gap as well. So in 2014, when the study was run, disabled workers earned $12,400 less. In 2018, the gap was a little bit shorter, with $4,200 less on average. And in 2021, when remote work was really just at its heyday, we were earning $1,800 less. I have a prediction, which is the next time that we run the study, that we will see a trend going back towards a larger gap, because I believe that disabled workers were greatly benefited by remote work, and we will see this return to a bigger pay gap because of the return to work policies. So as we see the gap widen, I do want to call attention to the fact that it compounds over time. So over the course of someone's career, and with intersectionality, such as being a woman or a non-binary person, or having a different cultural makeup, you see these factors compound. So someone who is multiply disadvantaged in accessibility will see a wider pay gap than someone who is not. And then when we compare full-time and part-time, the gap increases when you compare full-time workers who are women and full-time workers who are men. 84.3% of women report working full-time compared to 81.8% of men. And the wage gap was higher. It was $7,900 on average. So in other words, the gender pay gap cannot be explained by how much someone works, which it can often be explained in other fields that way, that someone might work part-time or in an area where full-time work is not supported, like some industries like education or nonprofit work. There's not full-time hours, and so the pay gap is a little bit better explained by the amount of work rather than equal work but different pay. And when we talk about the bias part of it, I also have a study that came out recently that's using the Harvard implicit bias association test. So this came out from the Center on Quality and Leadership, and Carly Friedman, who's the director of research there, examined disability professionals' conscious and unconscious disability attitudes, and they surveyed 417 disability professionals in a symbolic ableism and disability attitudes implicit association test. So this is a slide showing the explicit attitudes, and I'm going to do my best to describe it. There is a large preference for non-disabled people. So this slide shows a preference for non-disabled people ranging from no preference to a strong preference. So we have 22.80% showing no preference for disabled people or disabled people. I'm sorry, disabled people or non-disabled people. Then we have 23% that showed a preference for non-disabled people. 36.30% showed a moderate preference for non-disabled people. And then we have 17.90% that showed a strong preference for non-disabled people. And this is an explicit attitude. So this is what people state their preferences are, not even getting into what their unconscious biases are yet. And then when we look at implicit attitudes, this slide is a little more complicated. So we're comparing two sources of data, and we have a preference for non-disabled people or a preference for disabled people weighted on a slight, moderate, strong, or no preference scale. So when we look at implicit attitudes, there's a slight preference for non-disabled people at 14% and a slight preference for disabled people at 3.8%. When we look at the moderate portion, 24% have a preference for non-disabled people and 2% have a preference for non-disabled people. And then the next category, we have 45% that have a strong preference for non-disabled people and 1.8% that have a strong preference for disabled people. And only 10.4% had no preference at all. So when we combine all of these pieces of data together, we get this pie chart, which shows a slice of different combined attitudes. So we have a truly low prejudice, which is a low explicit and low implicit bias. And it comes in at one of the lowest scores of 15.80% of people had both a low explicit and low implicit. We have the averse ableists who have a low explicit and high implicit of 31.1%. And this means that this person is outwardly saying that they're not ableist and that they have explicit preferences that may or may not prefer disabled people, but they have implicit biases that keep them from possibly acting fairly. You have a principled conservative who has a high explicit preference for non-disabled people and a low implicit preference with 15.3%. And then you have the symbolic ableist with a high explicit and high implicit at 37.8%. And that's the highest one. And we see that here in the light green color, it's taking up most of that pie chart. So I want to address the next problem before I move on to solutions, which is burnout. I did a little bit of research into some of the industries that have the highest rates of burnout, and accessibility is such a small industry that we really didn't make the list, honestly. But I was looking at the industries, and the top one is agriculture. The second one is financial activities and insurance. The third is information publishing and telecommunications. The fourth is public sector. The fifth is professional and business services. And the sixth is education. Now, as a lot of you here are accessibility professionals or maybe accessibility enthusiasts, you might know that a lot of those on the list are activities that we participate in as accessibility professionals. So information publishing and communications, public sector work, professional services, and education are all a part of making sure that accessibility is forefront in the digital space. I did quote the percentage of workers here that are impacted by burnout, and I was very surprised at the numbers. Most of the numbers that are here for these industries are around 80% of workers that are impacted by burnout, which tells me that when I hear people in the accessibility space saying, I'm burnt out, I believe them because most people in very analogous sectors are burnt out. What I hear most often from accessibility professionals are they're constantly burnt out as well. I hear that there's an overwhelming workload due to not enough investment. I hear that there's not efficient processes, not the right point in the product process. I hear that there's insufficient resources or a lack of support from others. There's ableism, and there's a lot of fear around being in a low psychologically safe environment. And studies on burnout cite similar burnout causes. We have some numbers here on those, and the workload tops out at 45%. So that is one of the most common cited burnout causes. And then lack of resources is here at about 37%, micromanagement at 36.6%, toxic work environments at 34%, and we have stress at 33%. And these are very closely followed by lack of support and unclear job expectations, which if you've been reading any kind of job descriptions lately online, you might relate to some of the unclear job expectations and also the workload issues. I included this comic, which is a dog. It's a two-panel comic. It's a dog that's wearing a hat, and he's sitting in the middle of a burning house, and he looks rather far away, like he's not really there. There's a cup of coffee on the table, and he just sort of smiles and said, "This is fine." It's a popular meme that kind of encapsulates my feelings, which is that there's just this widespread lack of ability to do anything, and we either have to accept it or we just kind of dissociate from it and just are like, this is all fine. Which I know that it's sometimes hard to laugh at the things that we're going through, but it's one of the ways that I deal with it. So I hope that if any of you are feeling burnt out as well, that this maybe is also something that you can laugh at a little bit as well. So now I want to talk about solutions because I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I want to, make sure that we put out the fire, we hydrate, and that we are really prepped for making a difference in our communities. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was to mitigate your personal bias. I have a QR code here where you can go directly to the Harvard implicit bias tests. If you find that you have some implicit bias, you can act on reducing it. There's nothing wrong with admitting that you have implicit biases, because we all come to accessibility, to design, to development, to our respective careers with a set of lenses that we look at the world through. For instance, I admit really readily that I have a bias towards being raised in the US and having access to a lot of resources. Like, I've always had a toilet indoors, and I've always had pretty fast internet since I had internet. Uh, but a lot of places that's not the case. And so when I'm building products, sometimes I don't take that into account, because I'm used to my implicit bias being that other people have the same sort of situation that I do. So I work really hard on trying to mitigate that and trying to check myself and make sure that I'm mitigating those biases, both by, like, reading things and taking other people's experiences into account, and just checking to see if I have those biases. So this is a really great way to sort of test yourself and see, do I have the bias? And there's lots of tests there. So if you're interested in taking other ones, there's also other ones besides the disability test. Take stock of your time and your effort. I call it, quote, spend, end quote. But essentially, how do you spend your time online, and intentionally follow people that share and create content on the disability community? Attending this talk is already such a great step. I might be preaching to the choir in this sort of instance, but also, like, just taking into account the stories and the lives of other people with disabilities and other people that have different stories from mine. So I try to follow people even that are in the low vision and blind community that have different stories and different access needs, and work to value disabled. Well, I'm sorry, work to not value disabled people as inspiration solely, or in part on the basis of their disability, but also work on, valuing them for their talents and what they bring to an organization, or to your friend group, or, to your life and how they enrich you. This objectification is integrated into society, and it's really common. It's something that I've had to overcome myself as, internal ableism. Uh, but this is integrated into society, from popular media to inspirational social media quotes. I have linked on my resource page Stella Young's video, "I'm Not Your Inspiration, Thank You Very Much," from the TEDx Sydney conference 2014. Another way to demonstrate personal accountability is to consider the needs of others and to lean on checklists for tips, like running inclusive meetings, reading about the fight for disability rights, and the experiences of disabled people. You can also demonstrate that you're a safe person. Investigating how to deprogram bias and ableism from your speech is one way that you can do that. And I wanted to put a note here, because there's a lot of people that are a little bit critical of prioritizing removing ableism from language and other personal actions like that. And those aren't the most important actions you can do to remove systemic bias. But it does demonstrate that you as a person would be a safe ally or advocate for someone that has a disability. I'm much less likely to approach someone who uses a lot of ableist language to ask them for help with a problem that's systemic than someone who I know is trying to remove language that's ableist or disableist from their vocabulary. And then I want to talk about organizations and mitigating organizational bias. One of the things that I found when I was researching was overall organizations are not doing good. They are not including disabled workers in their DE&I efforts, and I'm sorry, diversity, equity, and inclusion is what DE&I stands for. And only 4% of organizations explicitly consider disability in their inclusion initiatives. Over 50% of global boards and executives report never discussing it at all in their DE and I initiatives. Many organizations leave it out altogether. And I do have a link here at the bottom, which you can access on the resource page as well. One of the things that I wanted to say is that inclusivity is key to achieving holistic accessibility across an organization. It's not enough to simply provide access. We have to strive to create an environment that's welcoming and inclusive for all people. And to further reinforce this, I wanted to say that if you are not a safe place for disabled people to work, then you will have disabled people leave. And they will not feel safe telling you when what you're doing is harmful, or if your product is doing something harmful, if you constantly tell them that their experiences are not important and are not worth prioritizing. So they will not help you prioritize the experiences of your customers. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was inclusive operations. And I know that in a time when diversity, equity, and inclusion is very politicized and mass layoffs are very frequent, that it's hard to talk about employee experience because there's a lot of tough decisions that are having to be made. I was actually just laid off last week, so I feel like I kind of predicted this sort of outcome. There's not a lot of companies that aren't being affected by layoffs. There's not a lot of people that aren't being affected by layoffs. And it's hard to think about, like, is this political? Is this not? But I'm going to argue that it's not political to think about including people with disabilities. When we include people with disabilities and we include disabled leaders, we're correcting a systemic wrong that has been created. Disabled workers are often overlooked for employment, promotions, and leadership positions due to bias against them. I've recently been talking with some disability and accessibility professionals in my social circle, and a lot of them say, I don't know many people that are disabled that are in accessibility leadership. And so organizations have to do more. One of the things that they could do is improve non-disabled leaders' knowledge and understanding of disability inclusion. And another way to mitigate bias would be to identify, guide, and mentor potential leaders who are disabled. And not all people that are disabled have to work on disability and accessibility initiatives, but by promoting people that have lived experience in accessibility and disability, then you are infusing that experience into your product process. So if I, as somebody that has low vision, create a product, I'm not going to not take that into account. Data is also very persuasive. So review your workforce data to understand the current state of disability equity within your organization and to try to find signs of potential bias in hiring, promotions, salary, turnover, and performance ratings. Performance ratings could be a whole nother talk because oftentimes performance ratings are used as a tool against people with disabilities. The next thing is to attract disabled workers, plan actions, set objectives, and develop a plan with manageable steps and a way to monitor your progress that will help your organization achieve this inclusive work environment. And make sure that you develop these inclusive hiring practices that reduce potential for intentional or unintentional bias in the screening out of disabled applicants, like eliminating unpaid speculative work and take-home assignments from design processes. I have some other things here to create safe workspaces, like anonymously capturing the number of people with disabilities in your organization, benchmarking people with disabilities and their workplace experience compared to peers without disabilities, eliminating common pain points or barriers for people with disabilities in your organizations, and to use intersectionality as well. And The one big thing I wanted to highlight here is to leverage these accommodation practice to improve productivity and satisfaction for all your employees, because not everyone who benefits from accommodation is disabled. Uh, Also, avoiding one size fits all policies. Like I mentioned earlier, remote work versus the return to work and return to office policies has really harmed disabled people. Other things that have a very one size fits all sort of approach are dress codes and a desk, hot desk, or office by rank rather than by needs. Another thing is to implement service design and invest in employee experience. Uh, you can invest in product service design, authentic representation of disabled people in product and marketing, and just really start designing your products around people with disabilities rather than just applying accessibility to your UIs. And I have a really simple accessibility model that I'll go through very quickly here. Uh, we want to really think about accessibility sometimes as being something that you apply to product, or to have like very rigid sets of levels that then you apply to a lot of different columns. But what I would like to put forward is that you can have any department work on accessibility, and it starts kind of at an awareness level, and then you start moving through technical accessibility. Once you start moving into service design, your products will be accessible, and you'll start having this culture of accessibility within your product organization. But once you move that into marketing and beyond, and your whole organization is operationalized, you can really start to create a culture of accessibility. And then, as the most important thing, I think, from this talk is to protect accessibility workers' energy. So if you're an individual contributor, don't treat accessibility like a checklist, because you will never finish. If you're a subject matter expert, try to focus your role on where you can do the most impact. So remediating one PDF, it's not really a good use of your time, but teaching people to remediate PDFs and create accessible documents, that might be a great use of your time. If your role isn't accessibility focused, you can still be skilled at bringing accessibility into that role. And the last thing I wanted to say to people that are individual contributors is practice self-care, build community, and participate in self-recognition. My friend Max Major has this book called You Don't Suck, and it's about imposter syndrome and burnout. And it has a lot of exercises in it to help increase your own self-recognition and self-worth. When you can't be recognized by your company and you have no control over whether you're laid off or whether your position is moved to another department, you really need to rely on your community and on yourself to recognize the hard work that you're doing. I wanted to say that I really appreciate it as someone that has disabilities, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people that appreciate it too. For managers and leaders, protect your direct reports, especially those with disabilities, from burnout. And I have some resources in the resource list for you to do that. I think one of the most important thing is to ask your team what they need to do, what they need to do their best work, and then don't commit one of the big three mistakes. Here's my big three mistakes, and this is according to me. It may not represent or indicate all mistakes: minor, moderate, serious, or critical. The first one is to bottleneck, to put accessibility at the end of the development process. It's inefficient and it's stressful for everyone. Having a low follow through, low commitment to people, process, and policy. This usually comes from no authority on accessibility and no central governance in an organization. Building things, quote unquote, for people with disabilities rather than with. This has late, low, or no involvement of people with disabilities and can lead to failed products, big missed opportunities, or inefficient processes as well. Morale is higher for everyone if it's with, by, and for us. Disabled workers are in accessibility. We can't deny that. Disabled workers need accessibility, and we need to champion accessibility workers. So if you're not in a position where you're working on accessibility every day, This is my call to action for you is to champion us because we're doing a lot of work out here. There's a lot of work to be done. We want to keep doing this work and we're very passionate about it. And we need your support to do it if you're not already doing the work with us. So this is my resource list. It's very long. I'm not going to read all of them on this call, but please check it out. I will also this is also included in the accessible PDF that will be posted by DQ and is also available. It will be available on LinkedIn on my profile. I will post it there as well. I just also wanted to say thank you really quickly to DQ for having me here. To Rachel Dunn, your advice and accountability is invaluable. To my partners for always listening and supporting me, and my friends in Accessibility Void for their care and encouragement and being my community. All right, I think we're ready for some questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Soren, for that impactful presentation. It sounds like a lot of the participants in the chat really resonated with a lot of what you had to say. And there's some really good questions. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. Um, one question I think is we can get started with. Let's see. So Maya is asking, how do you get good data to support disability efforts at a company, particularly when disclosure rates are so low and health privacy concerns prevent gathering data?
That's a really great question. So I think one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that you're gathering it anonymously. If you're collecting it through, say, like your HR platform, or through human resources or through a form that is sent directly to someone's email and it's limited in responses, then it can be very difficult for people to trust that you are not tracking this data. I think also not inquiring what the disability is also super important. Another way to get this data is to have like some ways of reporting that are not at all connected to your performance or human resources or any of those other like happiness survey initiatives, and let it be like completely disconnected from that, because then none of your comments can be tied to that data. So if you're concerned about like saying, well, I worked on this project or I wanted to give feedback on this manager, some companies, that's a very small pool. And so you could very easily identify someone personally. So I think disconnecting it from other sources of data and just focusing on one topic can be a much better way of doing it. And also making sure that you're using something that really ensures people's privacy and gives you anonymized aggregate numbers at the end.
Definitely. Awesome. Thank you. Um, Sharon is asking, so in regards to the survey that uh, you or the study that you showed on about disability professionals, um, is there any correlation between disability professionals and their bias and if they have a disability or not? I sense in the field a lot of people have no frame of reference for disability, so they tend to have these biases.
I would agree with that. I think that some people get into disability professions because they have an experience that's adjacent to disability, such as having a family member that has a disability or a friend that has a disability, or they just get introduced to it through an internship or other program. But it concerns me because I then see that these people have been in the field for a very long time and have a lot of exposure to people with disabilities. And both anecdotally and now data wise, we see that they have a lot of bias against people. And it's very infantilizing to think that like they see me as less than because they're providing me disability services. I don't think a doctor would see me as less than for treating a broken arm. So I would really prefer that disability professionals not see me as less than for assisting me with my access needs. Uh, I do think that having experience with disability can sometimes sensitize people to be more conscious of their internal and external bias. But like I said, I had some internal ableism that I needed to work through myself. Uh, for instance, I had a really tough time using mobility equipment for a while because I was afraid that people would think that it was strange or would question if I really needed it, because I am an occasional user, or a situational user. But I learned that it was really for my own safety, and I really just had to break down that bias that I had within myself so that I could keep myself safe and give myself what I needed to access the world. And I think that sometimes other people with disabilities, they may be working in the disability profession and they may still have these biases because they haven't done that work on themselves as well.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, and it sounds like some of that internalized ableism or internalized disableism could also be like a contributing factor. It sounds like. Yeah. There's a handful of questions concerning your study about the disability the pay gap. Um one question around that was let's see. So common career advice is to job hop to get pay raises. So a lot of people will mention that as one way to advance your career. However, as many of us know firsthand, the interview process is very much not designed for people with disabilities, making job hopping nearly impossible. Do you believe this partially explains part of the disability pay gap?
I think it could, especially depending on your particular specialization. Um, for instance, design interviewing is very long. A lot of other professions where disabled people are working in, say, like accounting or more human resources based professions, maybe teaching, there's not as long of a process as tech product development. I would say even design is still one of the longest ones that I've ever seen, because there's so many rounds, and oftentimes people give, like I was mentioning in my talk, take home exercises. There's even the best ones are still extra work of case studies, presenting your past work, uh, even though it's sometimes available in a portfolio online. So we do all this work to get the portfolio ready. We do all this work of, a take-home exercise or any of these things. And yeah, it can sometimes be very difficult to go through the job hunting process. And I do really, really empathize with anyone that's going through that. I think it could explain part of that pay gap. It could also be that there are very few places that are truly safe psychologically and also just physically for people with disabilities. And if you find a place that seems okay, it might be a very big ask for yourself to say, I'm going to consider leaving because it's like, well, at least I'm safe here. Maybe I don't have the best pay, but at least I wouldn't be somewhere where I'm burnt out completely, or I'm constantly feel like I'm being harassed, or I have microaggressions thrown at me every day. So I definitely empathize with that, and can see why it would be hard for someone to leave a job.
Right. Yeah, there's an exposure to potential, risk and vulnerability in doing that.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, and then another question regarding and it looks like we're just about at time, so we'll wrap up with this question. But another question regarding the pay gap. So this one's from Armand, and they're asking, I've heard from a disabled relative that some disabled individuals choose a lower wage to prevent their benefits from being taken away. Do you know anything about this? And maybe I would add personally, if you have any recommendations on navigating that.
Sure. So I do know that some people will take a lower pay rate to, and I believe that this person is commenting on disability benefits such as like government benefits like social security, disability income, those kinds of benefits. Yes, absolutely, people often will not get married because they're afraid of losing their benefits. So I mean, that's again a whole other talk, is marriage equality and disability. But yes, I think that that is definitely possible. I think also it also limits the ability to do contract work because the healthcare benefits that are often offered through staffing firms and contract work are little to nothing. So it can be very difficult to consider taking a contract job because you might just be better off taking a lower salary and staying at a salary job that has benefits, because your medications or your other support equipment or your mobility equipment might be too expensive if you switch to another insurance. So there's so many unknowns. I do recall like last time I did a job hunt, I had a spreadsheet where I had every single benefit laid out, and I had to break out like how much would it cost me to go to this company and to be able to get the equipment that I need to live. And sometimes it netted out that more money was not a better quality of life for me. So I can definitely empathize with that. And I think it's something that people need to take into account when they're thinking about trying to attract people with disabilities as well. And it's a good addition to the next time I give this talk.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for the insightful answers and for a great session.